Thank you for listening to The Luminous Mind. Remember to subscribe to our free podcast so you won't miss any of our inspiring content. Here is episode number 127. As you're listening to this podcast, remember that The Luminous Mind is an affiliate for Magnetic Memory Method.
Remember that the more you know, the more you can know. And so if you like knowing stuff, then figure out how to know as much as you can.
Benjamin Franklin once said, "Do not curse the darkness, rather light a candle instead." If you're ready to set your mind on fire, then prepare yourself for The Luminous Mind with your host, Rebecca Bowman.
Today's fire starter is Anthony Metivier. Best-selling author Anthony Metivier is the founder of Magnetic Memory Method, a systematic 21st century approach to memorizing foreign language, vocabulary, dreams, names, music, poetry, and much more in ways that are easy, elegant, effective, and fun. Thank you, Anthony, for joining us.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure to be able to speak about memory to anybody who is interested in listening.
Well, and I'm super excited to talk to you because I have a horrible memory, so this will be a fun podcast. Why don't you go ahead and briefly tell us a little bit about yourself? Just give us some background of who you are.
All right. Well, I'm someone who used to think I have a horrible memory, but I've changed that around and seen some miraculous things happen in my time, both for myself and others. So who am I? Well, I'm originally from Canada, living in Europe and Germany, and I have a PhD in humanities that I almost didn't complete because of some problems that I had, psychological problems, depression and all that. And in a mysterious sequence of adventures and twists and turns, I discovered memory techniques, and I went as deeply into them as I went into my dissertation topic, and one really has fed into the other. So I was able to complete, despite some health issues, and go to write a lot of books about it and record a lot of audio and make a lot of video courses and help a lot of people in the process. So it's been a real blessing. And there's a lot more detail, but that's the broad scope.
That's great. This is a silly question because I can totally see the application, but I want you to give me your answer. So explain to me why somebody would want to learn the skill of memorization and how someone could apply that into their life.
Well, I think people want to learn it because they struggle with remembering things that it's just an astonishing sensation to feel that you've forgotten something, especially when you've just looked at it 5 seconds ago.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's probably one of the most painful sensations that you'll ever have in terms of psychological conditions. The forgetfulness is a psychological condition, and the question is always, is it really necessary? And there are ways to increase your memory. So anybody who is suffering with that and wants to not wipe it or shove it under the rug and deal with it has options, and those options don't have to involve software. They don't have to involve drugs. They can just involve certain techniques that raise your concentration and your awareness and presence and your ability to encode information, store it, and then recall it later. And it's just a matter of strategy. It's no different than opening a drawer, sticking something in it, and then so long as you can remember that it's in the drawer, then you pull it out. And when it's your mind, you can, of course, remember it's in your mind, because where else would information be? So it can help anybody with anything, that math, equations related to processes, vocabulary. A lot of doctors and lawyers and all kinds of professionals struggle. They're just overwhelmed with all kinds of terms and procedures. And then there's language learners who, there's all kinds of points of entry into a language, but at the end of the day, you can't really learn grammar without learning some words, and you can't learn words or sentences without learning some grammar. So somewhere you got to get into that double circle, and memory is a huge player there. So many people, unfortunately, give up on learning languages at different stages of the game. Usually is memory that is the culprit, or rather how people approach the memory part of language learning, that's the culprit. So you can rejuvenate even the most juvenile memory so that it does what you need it to do.
Well, that's great. Where we're in the information age, too, like I said, I can see we have so much information that we can take in. It is frustrating when you forget it. So especially when you've paid big money to get that education. So tell us a little bit about how you discovered your memory techniques. You kind of said you stumbled upon it, or tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, well, I had at a certain point in my undergrad been diagnosed with bipolar disorder, and they threw me on all kinds of medication. I only ever got that one high, and the rest was downhill into these depressions. And the medicine didn't help because when I started my PhD, I had to read way more than you ever have to do as an undergrad, and I just couldn't concentrate. I couldn't focus. And I still have some of these issues to this day, but I've gotten a lot better. But you can't remember stuff or memorize stuff that you can't even read in the first place. So these depressions got worse and worse. And I was, I had a number of options. One was just to cave into the depression and go down that dark place, or quit graduate school, or somehow, just live off the student loans until they petered out and hide away in my apartment or whatever. And so what I decided to do was a little bit of both. I stayed hiding in my apartment, and I prepared what I was thinking of as an emergency paycheck, because I'd always been really interested in magic tricks, and it was kind of a relief to have something to do with my hands, and I could watch videos to learn and improve my card magic. And so I didn't have to read anything. And so I would practice and practice and practice. And then one day I came across the holy grail of magic tricks, which is a memorized deck, being able to look at it once, or appear to look at it once, and then name all the cards in order. And I say appear to look at it once because you can create it as an illusion, but there's also a genuine way to memorize a deck of cards after seeing the order once. And so I thought, this is impossible. But I had an audiobook, so I didn't have to read anything, and I could hear it. And my mind just captured onto this technique, and I immediately tried it, and I was astonished by how, after learning it and applying it, 15 minutes later, I had a deck memorized. Kid you not, this is the most extraordinary feeling I ever have had in my life, and I've held on to it ever since because it's the closest thing to real magic and miracles that I've ever experienced. And I instantly saw how that I could apply that to all these studies that I was working on and struggling with. Then there was still the concentration issue, so I started reading these books out loud, and I'd make my own audiobooks, then I'd listen to myself, and then I'd make index cards, and then using the same memory technique, which involved a memory palace, I would lay out this information along a journey in my mind based on a series of real buildings. Then I'd rehearse these little memory palaces until that it got into long-term memory. Anyway, to make a longer story shorter, I went to these field exams. You have to sit for 2 field exams before you are given the green light to write your dissertation and ultimately go to the defense. I got so cocky that I was, citing page numbers because I just remembered what page they were on in certain cases. Yeah, so to be perfectly honest, I felt like crap all the time anyway. I didn't solve depression. It raised my confidence though, which helps feel better. And it continues to do that to this day when the downtimes come. But it's just something that's so miraculous that when you learn how to use memory techniques, it doesn't matter how awake you feel or how happy you feel or anything like that. Now, certainly you get an advantage if you're healthy and you've eaten properly and you've been well rested. But I went to a memory competition completely hungover with no proper sleep because I was kept awake on the plane the whole time. And I still did half as well as the guy who holds the World Guinness Book of Records for memorizing the most amount of cards in the world. And so half as well with this guy is pretty damn good, even though I just was And don't ask why I was drinking. I don't normally do, but it was a long story. But that's what's so beautiful about them is once you understand how to use them, you do not have to rely on the situation that you're in from the standpoint of mood or pain or the kinds of things that human beings suffer.
Yeah, anxiety or something like that.
Anxiety might be an Achilles heel here, but in the courses and the books and programs that I put together, one thing I always teach is relaxation. When you use these memory techniques, if you are in a state of relaxation, as much as you can be while you're doing the memorization and the learning and practicing the recall, you can condition yourself to be calm and relaxed while you're accessing the information. It takes a bit of practice, a little bit of time, but to this day, when I do it and I'm in situations with speaking a new language, and which can be quite nerve-wracking, so long as I've actually done the studies with a little bit of meditation first, little muscle relaxations and breathing exercises, just sort of fall right into that state of relaxation when you're trying to recall stuff, so you don't feel embarrassed or anxiety when you're doing your first speaking in front of people. So
that is wonderful. Well, I love it. You can tell that it was just a huge bout of inspiration that just kind of came to you. That is wonderful. So explain to us what the magnetic memory method is and how it works. And tell us a little bit about some of your services that you offer. We talked about videos and stuff like that, but tell us a little bit more about that.
Right. Well, yeah, sometimes the way it gets described sounds like you're asking someone to build a jet engine in their head, because there's a lot of moving parts and you use them all at the same time. And the thing is you're using them all at the same time all the time anyway. But when someone starts to break it down and you see, there's this and then there's that, and then it's a bit overwhelming to perceive all of that at once. So the trick in all of this is to teach people one step at a time. So as I begin to describe it, the listener, please do not feel overwhelmed, because it's actually really elegant, even if it sounds like madness. That's some reviews I've gotten on my book, that this guy's stuff comes from the Twilight Zone. That was a review I got one time.
Oh, gosh.
But, okay, so basically what you're going to do when you use memory techniques, and there are many different ones, but the ones that I teach are use a memory palace. The less sexy term would be a location-dependent mnemonic strategy, right? You recreate, say, your bedroom in your mind, or your entire home in your mind, or a school that you went to, or a church, or a movie theater, or a museum, or some place that you're familiar with. You've been there. That's the important start. And you recreate it in your mind using specific strategies so that you start in the most optimum place, and then you move to the next place that's most optimum. So a corner, and then over to a chair, and then the next corner, and then there's maybe a table, and you proceed along this linear trajectory. And on each of those places, in the corner, on the chair, the next corner, on the table, you place these images that you create. And the images are created in such a way they interact with what you don't know. So you're going to use images that you do know in order to take information into your mind that you don't know and make it familiar by having the images interact with it. So to give a sort of a concrete example, if you wanted to memorize a line of poetry like the first sentence of the Iliad or something like that, the first lines, which are Peleus son Achilles, sing O Muse, the vengeance deep and deadly whence to Greece, unnumbered ills arose. So if you can imagine around the corner of a small office in the back of a school, Brad Pitt is kicking a garbage pail. Brad Pitt played Achilles in a movie called Troy. So of Peleus' son, because pale sounds like Peleus, sing of Peleus' son Achilles. Achilles now is Brad Pitt. Now, of course, the person listening to this who goes and memorizes this line, they may not see Brad Pitt in their mind. They'll come up with something else. But for me, that's what I already know. So I fuse it with something that I don't know using images. And so this pail gets kicked at the Statue of Liberty, sing O Muse, and she's really mad. So she digs with a shovel really deep and starts throwing the dirt, the vengeance, deep and deadly. Whence to Greece, this dirt flies past, a map of Greece on the wall. Unnumbered ills arose, and there I am at the door of an office, wiping away numbers that I've written in chalk, unnumbered ills, and I'm sneezing. So it's really as simple as that, but you're doing it along a journey, and you've taken time to sort of craft this memory palace journey, and you take a little bit of time to think, what could I see in my mind that I already know? in order to dance with this information I don't know and then take it up as my dance partner whenever I want and replay it until that I get it into long-term memory and I don't need the memory palace anymore.
Wow. Well, it sounds like for a person who is a very visual learner, I know I am for sure, it sounds like it would work really well. During your research, did you have some other challenges along the way? And then what did you learn from those as you were trying to implement this whole system?
Well, the important thing to understand is that I'm not a visual person. I have actually worked to make myself more visual, and it gives a little bit of advantage when you make yourself more visual, but you don't need to be visual. You can just think the concept of Brad Pitt kicking a pail and sort of place that concept in a particular place. Or you could hear him kicking a pail. Different people have different representation centers, and so there are exercises you can do, or representational modes, I guess. There's no special center in the brain where you go to check out to buy options on your mode of processing information. But we all seem to lean towards these different things, so you can figure out what that might be for you and not get hung up on, well, I don't see this in my mind. Same thing with a memory palace. You don't need to see the memory palace in your mind. In fact, that can get in the way. So people who compete in memory championships, they try actively not to see the memory palace. It's like a constellation of stars. So that corner and that table and that chair and that other corner, they're not recreating that in their minds. It's just like looking at the Big Dipper. You don't need to see the Big Dipper in order to perceive the shape of the Big Dipper. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like you don't have to impose a spoon on top of it. You just say, hey, that's the Big Dipper. And it's the same thing with a memory palace. That's my home. And boom, 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 boom. These are these images. And they can do it really fast. I mean, the world record for memorizing a deck of cards was just broken under 20 seconds. That guy is not rebuilding a memory palace in his head. So those are some of the things I discovered to answer your questions, is that there's different strokes for different folks when it comes to exactly how each person is going to do it. And that's why I ultimately called my training the magnetic memory method rather than the magnetic memory system. And it's very important, the difference, because there are no memory systems except for the ones that you create for yourself. And even those need to be flexible to the extent that you can, there's a great line about a samurai should be so prepared to execute one last move that he can execute it perfectly even with his head cut off. And that's kind of what mnemonics are like, You get so good at this stuff, but you have to be flexible so that, when some kind of piece of information comes, you can change from whatever system you've created to yourself and use the universal principles of memory to absorb it and interact with it and dance with it, like I said. So you're never caught off guard. You're always prepared with respect to the depth of training that you've put into it. And I know that can sound scary because I'm talking about, training and all the hours of investment and so on. Really, it's minimal. There are people who pick this up and they have become world memory champions like 6 months later. So it's not rocket science or anything like that. It's really quite simple and easy and elegant and fun.
Oh, great. That does sound fun, actually. So kind of go back and tell us a little bit how you think your paradigm has changed over time and with experience about what you think about learning and memorizing material.
Well, the biggest thing that has changed is that there are no excuses. So anytime that I say to myself, oh, that's too hard, or oh, that's boring, there are no excuses, because it isn't too hard and it isn't boring. It can be made exciting, and it can be made, if not easy, it can be made a lot easier. And the fun component and the challenge is just part of the adventure. So that's the biggest paradigm shift, is that there are no excuses for things to be dry and boring or hard.
Yeah. Well, I loved what you said, when we finished that last little bit that we talked about, that it was fun, because that does shut a lot of people off to wanting to learn new things, because our society tends to make learning not so fun. This does sound a lot more fun. So,
well, our society also forces us to concentrate on learning a bunch of stuff that we don't care about in the school system and so forth. So that's an argument for a different day. But one great advantage you can give yourself if you do use memory techniques is to use them for things that you're passionate about. The success is directly in line with the amount of passion that you have for mastering something. Well, they'll still work if you hate what you're studying, but they work a hell of a lot better if you love it.
Before we go on, let's listen to this message.
Hey Fire Starters, I'm Sydney Jensen, Social Media Manager at the Luminous Mind. Rebecca Bowman and I have been working behind the scenes to bring you the very best of this podcast, and let me tell you, it's all starting with our new and improved website. Now, it's the same address, theluminousmind.net, but we've brought you new features like downloadable graphics, direct streaming from the site, and an improved sponsor list where you can find some incredible deals. You've got to check it out. The site's still evolving, though, so we need you to tell us what you think and be honest. We love hearing from our listeners, so drop us a comment at contact@theluminousmind.net or message us on Facebook. We look forward to hearing from you, but for now, let's get back to that episode.
For people who have memory problems and who are elderly. It's not sufficient to just treat the medical problem. We have to engage different parts of our existence. We have to think about social aspect.
Welcome back to The Luminous Mind with Anthony Metivier and Magnetic Memory Method. Well, and that does bring me to my next question. We have done that in the past, that we can memorize something for the short term and then we kind of forget about it after the test or whatever is over. How can we apply this knowledge to make it last, so that we're putting it into memory but then making it last? Can you give us ideas of how that can be achieved?
In different wording?
The skills that can be used just for the short term, how can that be applied to make that knowledge last, so we're not just back to that, just memorizing for the test and then just getting rid of it.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
So
okay.
Like in terms of creating long-term knowledge.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that's the goal, right? Basically, the whole point of using memory techniques from my perspective and the way that I try to set people up is exactly for the long-term gain. And how that's done is by using the memory palace or a number of memory palaces to rehearse the information so that it gets into long-term memory. So people, right or wrong, they come in and they have a kind of fantasy that they're going to just use these tools and then boom, everything's going to be instantly memorized and away they go for life. But what's more realistic is that you use the tools, you get the stuff into short-term memory, you hold it, then you exercise it and massage it into your mind through internal repetition. And you do things like writing down from memory what you memorized. You do things like speaking from memory what you memorized. You keep reading in that subject, or you keep studying that language. You listen to it. You read it. You engage in it. And then you repeat the process with memorizing more stuff. And so it becomes like a way of life. Your depth of knowledge and the longevity comes from use, even as it would without memory techniques. But you just get a very huge boost and a special advantage, so that ultimately what ends up happening is you become stronger and stronger with the techniques. And the more you learn, the more you can learn, because memory techniques rely on association. So the more you know, the more you have to associate with, and it just builds and builds. It's like, it's kind of a cliche thing to say, but it's like Star Wars stuff where the Force is strong in you, young Padawan, and all you got to do is like practice, and then next thing you know, you're flipping and jumping and swinging swords around your head made out of light, and you just have that power, but you always have to keep it up. So
well, and that probably goes back to why really learn stuff that you love versus just trying to memorize just for whatever.
At the end of the day, it just works, period. But one of the things is just having fun. If you can find the fun in it, then you can do it. If it is a real pain and you're not interested in it, then consider the alternatives, which is just flashcards and automated based repetition software, which unfortunately doesn't help a lot of people. It's sort of overblown the extent to which that it helps people. And it's not that it won't work, it's just that people find that so frustrating and boring that they give up on even those things. I know I do. When I study a language, I can't handle it. And I've done sort of hybrid things where you use memory palaces in conjunction with index cards, but it's just not necessary. The reality is that there are polyglots who do very well with index cards and standard rote repetition, but it's because they've trained themselves over long periods of time to do it effectively, and they have the discipline to use it in the ways that it actually works. But most people don't, because it is dreadfully boring for most of us. So if you can find an alternative that you like, then go for it. or have multiple tools. Use sometimes repetition, sometimes mnemonic-based repetition. Use all the other things that I've mentioned, like listening to lectures on a topic or watching some kind of foreign language series on YouTube and writing things out, and get everything involved that you can. It's good for you in so many ways. It's not just about memory. It's about cognition, attention span, the ability to be more social because you have more things to talk about with more people, multiple levels of society. The benefits go on and on.
They definitely do. So, and I kind of cut you off earlier when I was asking you to tell us a little bit more about your services, what you offer with the blog, your videos, and your podcast. But tell us some of the successes that you've seen with those services that you have offered.
Oh, okay. So the biggest thing I've achieved for people is the memorization and the retention and the recall of foreign language vocabulary, which is one of the biggest pains because it's such abstract information until that you know it. And even to this day, there are words that I've memorized and they're still abstract even though I know what they mean. And it's kind of just strange that they would mean that and sound so different than in English. And there are even words that there aren't English equivalents to, but you can have them in your mind what they sort of mean. Anyway, but the thing is the most extraordinary thing happens to people. So 2 examples in particular come to mind. There is a wonderful woman who works with the Aborigines in Australia, and there's a language there called Ernta. And if I remember correctly, it only has 300 words or something like that.
Oh, wow.
Like a very limited word pool. But she still struggled with memorizing them. And in 10 days, she had 200 of them.
Oh.
She wrote a blog post about this. She felt that her fluency improved by 70%. In terms of understanding what was going on around her. So that's one story. And then there's a fellow in Jerusalem who, for his research and so forth, was studying, and I assume he's still studying, ancient Ethiopic. And he did 1,000 words in 6 weeks.
Holy cow.
And so then he was super happy. And he said, now I start reading 1,000 pages of ancient Ethiopic. And so, and I talked to him for about an hour, and he just was overblown by how that worked for him. I just was thinking, why can't everybody have that passion that you do? Because these results do range from 200 a week or 200 in 10 days to 1,000 in 6 weeks. And that's just skimming the surface, of what you could do if you put your mind to it. And then there's just totally perfectly fine and nothing to sniff at. If you do 1 word a day when you're studying a language, that's still 30 or 31 or in some cases 28 words a day, right? Or a month, sorry.
Yeah.
And that can make a difference. That can make a huge difference over time, especially if you are targeted in the words and the phrases that you want to memorize. So even it's just amazing what 1 new word a day, even in your own mother tongue, what 1 new word a day can do for you.
Yeah. Like you said earlier, when you see some success in that memorization and that recall, that really does light a fire and make it exciting, maybe a little more fun. So, and with your blog, what do you write about then? Ways that people can improve their memory, or what do you see there?
Yeah, well, at magneticmemorymethod.com, it's podcast based, but because I like to serve as much as I can, most of those podcasts they have a written version of what you hear in the audio. So they're not the same exactly, but you can read through the basic same information. But you really got to listen if you want to hear all the stories that I come up with in between. But they range from real technical stuff, little advantages you can create through different specific exercises, to just general information. Like last week I was just compiling scientific research into the effects of meditation on extending your concentration and how that applies to memory, and talking about some studies they did with monks who can use their mind to raise their temperature, and how you don't have to do that, but you could do the same activities that they did to improve your concentration. And then it ranges from interviews with other memory experts I often get these emails from people that are like, I can't believe how you feature so many other memory experts. Aren't you afraid of the competition? And I just think, this is the internet. There is no competition.
Yeah.
But,
well, and like you said, everyone has a different way, different method that might work for them, right? And that's why you collaborate with other people.
Well, sure. And I'll tell you, 1 is the most dangerous number you will ever know when it comes to knowledge.
Yeah, exactly.
You can't just go on one technique or one teaching. I know as much about memory, and I've gotten all the advantages that I've gotten from it, and the depth of teaching that I'm able to do, because to this day, a month doesn't go by when I don't read a new memory book by somebody, whether from deep in history or that was released 2 days ago. I'm always reading in it, and there's no end to this. It's an art, right? If you were a painter or if you were a musician, you don't just one day throw away all your music books and never read one again. There's no end to it. A musician is always developing. You read the history, you read theory, you read, you do dedicated practice and scales and arpeggios and whatever the case may be. So I encourage people to make memory a way of life, and just to get in as deep as you can and with as many people as you can. So I really use the website not just to, sell stuff, but to really educate people and introduce them to an entire universe that has so many ramifications, so many self-development possibilities that are connected to it, so much history, so much culture, so much world domination, because really the people who are in control have some memory advantage throughout history. There's a guy, Giordano Bruno, who wrote memory manuals for a king. Now, I'm simplifying a story that's a little bit more complicated than that. But and if people are interested, they can hear an interview that I did with Bruno's translator, Scott Gosnell, on magnetic memory method. Just go to magneticmemorymethod.com/Bruno, Bruno, and you can hear the fuller version of that story I just glossed over. But it has been cherished and honored in parts of our world history, and it's being cherished and honored again through the miracles of technology with the internet and the spread of information. So we're having a renaissance right now. So I'm very excited and honored to have been a part of it successfully. And so that's what the site is all about. And when people are there, if they want, they can sign up for some free videos that I have. And in all transparency, those offer people the opportunity to join my masterclass. But if you're not into the marketing element, then just switch off after the lessons. They are full lessons. They will teach you what to do. And if you are interested in more study, then it's there for you.
That's great.
And that's what the site does.
That is great. Well, tell us, what do you feel like a good habit is to have in your personal life that would help you with your memory?
Well, there are a couple. If you want to do something really fun that's good for your memory and a great way to start your day off in a memorable way, write down your dreams. And if you can't remember any dreams, write down that you can't remember any dreams. And that will usually act as a catalyst so that you start remembering more and more dreams. But it's a great way of spending a bit of time first thing in the morning on your memory and on concentrating and practicing recall and translating what you've recalled into another medium, which is writing. So it's going from your mind into not a concrete form as such, but into another. You're translating it, and that's a thought exercise, and it just primes your day for creativity and for recall. So that's just a kind of general thing. And then in terms of little exercises that are so fun to do and so beneficial. I have an interview with a guy named Gary Small, and he has a book called 2 Weeks to a Younger Brain. At least I hope that's what it's called. But so all of a sudden, sometimes I have these things. I was like, did I remember that correctly? I always got to be on guard. I've talked to memory champions who are very public, and we make mistakes too. We're not bulletproof, but I'm pretty sure that's what it's called. Anyway, he gives an exercise in there that's absolutely brilliant. I practice it all the time, which is when you're walking down the street, just try and remember 4 details about people that you see. You're never going to be able to confirm the memory because you probably will never see them again. But just think like blue shirt, black shoes, red pants, and hat, or, glasses, brown hair, black bag, and some, skirt. And you just notice these things. And then later in the day, an hour later or so, just try and recall them. Just the action, just the activity of trying to recall them will exercise your brain and your mind and your memory. And so then if you want to get into actual practice of mnemonics, then one of the things I strongly encourage people to do in my masterclass and in my books and so forth is to memorize playing cards, 15 minutes a day. And because it's abstract, you can constantly shuffle the order. You never will encounter the same order again unless you're very fast and doing it all the time. So that's a great exercise. Or just memorize something, like a poem, lyrics to a song, some foreign language words, some words in your own language, some facts, some dates, some numbers, and just take a little bit of time, even if it's just 4 or 5 times a week, 3 times a week, like going to the gym. You would go to the gym 3 times a week and take a rest, and then
exercising for your brain, right?
Yeah, and in a way, we're crazy not to, because a lot of the stuff that we're doing with searching the internet and so forth is like the lazy recliner for your mind.
Yeah,
like that guy who sits in his chair all day with a bag of chips in his lap. And when we're not using our minds actively, that's essentially what we're doing, just flipping channels and looking for something that amuses us instead of being amusing to ourselves.
Yeah, entertaining instead of doing something active. So tell us, do you have anything new coming out? Like, what are some of your long-term goals that we can look forward to?
Well, one thing that I'm plucking away on slowly but surely is what I call the magnetic memory method matrix. So my first book was How to Learn and Memorize German Vocabulary. And when that took off, it was a real hit. And I just actually last week released the second edition of that, which also has done successfully well so far. I then turned the same book into Spanish and French and Swedish and Arabic and Italian. And so there are a number of languages yet to go, and I want to have 25 in total. Well, I think 25 would be nice, the top 25 languages, and then have those books translated into each other. So 25 versions of each in those languages, which would be 625 editions of the book. And so I can do that slow or I can do that fast. It all depends on revenue and investment and so forth. But so far, so good. And I'm having lots of fun. And yeah, I do other things. I got a audiobook coming out soon called Self-Improvement Supercharger. And there is a project. I'm going to Tel Aviv at the end of the month to speak with some collaborators. And we're probably going to do a kind of more self-improvement with Jonathan Levy, who we're probably going to do, like a video course in some kind of self-improvement area that really serves our audiences better, because it's not just about memory and speed reading and all these super learning skills, but how you think about life and what you do with all those superpowers once that you've developed them. So
being able to apply it makes a big difference. So I love it.
For sure.
Tell us, like, the legacy that you hope to leave. Have you thought about that? Like, what legacy do you want to leave?
To tell you the truth, I've never thought about it. I just kind of, if I think about anything, because I've had health problems, I think about just reducing any suffering that I have and that I would, heaven forbid, cause anybody else to an absolute minimum. And that's legacy enough in the moment.
That's probably the best gift you could ever leave anybody.
Well, I think actually it's an important life lesson, because the reality is, and this has everything to do with memory, is that when we're gone, and there's nothing more to enjoy. So you better get started right now and take care of yourself and take care of others, because that's how you live the best possible life.
I love that. Yeah. Thank you. Now, before we say goodbye, do you have any final parting words for our listeners? And then please give us your contact information, how our listeners can get in touch with all the products that you have and books and things like that.
Well, I suppose the finest word is to say that I hope to hear from everybody listening to this sometime soon. And if they would like, then they can come to magneticmemorymethod.com. There's a contact button on the main page, and that will get an email to me. You have to enter some kind of security number thing so that we know you're not a spammer, or you can go to your email box, the nearest email program that you have, and enter Anthony at magneticmemorymethod.com. But I strongly encourage people to take that free video series on my website and just see if that's something for them. Again, don't feel overwhelmed if it all sounds like you're building a space station in your head. It's just something where you take action and you'll get it. you'll get it, and you'll be amazed with yourself what you can do. And so, yeah, if those are better final words than the other ones I was trying to to give out, is just simply remember that the more you know, the more you can know. And so if you like knowing stuff, then figure out how to know as much as you can.
Well, great. Thank you. It's been super fun to talk to you, and I've learned a ton already. So thank you for joining us. I appreciate your time.
Well, thank you. And it was a pleasure and an honor, and I appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to The Luminous Mind. To learn more about Anthony Metivier and to get Magnetic Memory Method, go to our show notes at theluminousmind.net. Be sure to become a subscriber to our free email list and get our new monthly newsletter. Then check out our services tab to see how we can continue to assist you, our fire starters. Also, to help us continue production of inspiring content, go to the sponsor tab at theluminousmind.net for more information on sponsorship and affiliate programs. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, Google+, and now Pinterest. Get our free audio content by subscribing on YouTube, iTunes, and Stitcher. To help us grow, consider these easy ways. Tell your friends about us, leave us a review, share our content. Tell us how we can help you so together we can continue to light minds on fire and change the paradigm of education